to another edition of Two Guys and a Chainsaw.
I'm Todd.
I'm Craig.
And today, Craig, I feel like we have to come clean with our listeners.
All right, if you think so.
We've missed a couple weeks. We had some technical difficulties. Of course, we posted that on our website and on Facebook. And then we were late getting this podcast out as well. And so I feel we owe everyone an explanation. I have moved to China. About a month ago, my wife, actually 2 months ago now, isn't it? My wife and I packed up our bags and headed to China. And, of course, we knew this was coming, so Craig and I had recorded our last 4 episodes before we left, thinking that, well, about a month would give us enough time to get here, get settled into our apartment and stuff. And it turns out that we had a hard time getting an apartment. We're here in Beijing, and apartments are at a premium. And so we were stuck in a hotel for about a month and a half. And while we were in that hotel, we had really crappy Wi-Fi. And so between that and my computer breaking down, and then trying to get my computer fixed in Beijing, not knowing any Chinese yet, all that just threw a big wrench in the works.
Yeah, a little bit.
So we were late getting out those last 2 podcasts that we recorded before I left the States. And then, of course, Craig and I tried recording this Lost Boys podcast last week, and things didn't go so well on our ends, this being our first time doing this via Skype. So never fear, we are going to continue with this podcast as long as we're able, but we have to do it through Skype now.
Right.
Like about, 3/4 of the other podcasters out there. So we are giving this another shot. So if you're hearing this, then it came through just fine. All right. So anyway, the long story short, here we are, Lost Boys, right, Craig?
Yep, here we go.
Now, you chose The Lost Boys because you have fond memories of this from when you were a kid, right?
Right, yeah. This is, again, I've said it a million times, this is one of those movies that one way or another we had on VHS. I don't know if my dad taped it off of HBO or dubbed a tape, I don't know, but for as long as I can remember, this was just one that we always had readily available, and I watched probably a million times. So yeah, and I just being a kid of the '80s, a boy of the '80s, it was kind of difficult to escape the whole the two Coreys phenomenon, and I was a big fan right from the get-go. And this was their first movie together. Both of them, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, had been working actors since they were little boys, and they had both done stuff in the horror genre. Corey Haim had done Silver Bullet, which was the adaptation of Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf. Corey Feldman had done one of the Friday the 13th movies. He originated the Tommy Jarvis character in one of the Friday the 13th movies. And then this was the first time they came together, and then they did a whole bunch of stuff after, and I was a big fan of all of their stuff, as I think were a lot of young people of our day.
Yeah, the two Coreys were like a staple of 80s movies. And you'd get them confused sometimes.
Right. Well, I didn't. It's funny, when I was in college, I talked a lot about this stuff, nostalgia stuff with my friends, and all my girlfriends, they were big Corey Feldman fans and thought Corey Feldman was like the hot one. I always was more of a Haim fan myself. I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, both of them, big stars of the 80s. Unfortunately, their flames burned out a little bit as they got into the 90s and as they got a little bit older, but made a lot of really popular movies. I liked this one. I liked License to Drive. Dream a Little Dream flew a little bit more under the radar, I think, but I was always a big fan of that movie too. Just a fan of these guys in general, and I think part of the reason for that is because you could tell in these movies that these guys really just had kind of a connection, a chemistry. They were great friends in real life. They went through a lot of stuff together, and that continued through their adult lives. Unfortunately, they both struggled with some things Corey Haim sadly eventually met his demise due to some of the problems that he had. Corey Feldman has since then spoken out and said that there was some abuse and stuff going on in the industry, which is really sad. But nevertheless, they left their legacy with these handful of movies, and now, as a nearly 40-year-old guy, I can still kind of look back on these, and it's a nice reminder of a different time.
It is, and I think that's the thing that struck me the most about this film. I have to admit that I have never seen this before.
I can't believe that. I don't know how you're a horror fan and you got all the way through your life without having ever seen this movie. I mean, it's not, we'll get into it. I kind of consider this to be kind of a classic vampire movie, but I haven't really sat down and watched it start to finish in probably years, and having done that now, it's dated. It's maybe not held up as well as some of the others, but really, it's kind of a definitive vampire movie. You still see these memes all over Facebook and stuff, ridiculing Twilight and whatnot, and it always it shows the vampires from the Lost Boys and says, "These are vampires, not this," and it shows the Edward Cullens or whatever. So I can't believe you made it this far in your life without having seen it.
I can't either. And, and it was always at the video store. It was always available to rent. I think to me, it kind of disguised itself. It was never like a hardcore vampire movie.
Right.
It always, even from the box art to just the reputation surrounding the film, is that it's more of this sort of hip teenager movie.
Yeah.
At first, and a vampire movie second, right?
Yeah, well, and it kind of, it capitalized on kind of like the 80s glam rock kind of thing, and that's, the vampires are very much somebody you would have seen in a hair band of the 1980s, and so, yeah, I mean, there was always, and it was young Hollywood, you've got Kiefer Sutherland, Donald Sutherland's son, who had done some stuff, I think, but this was kind of his big first role, at least as far as I can remember, and then you've got the Coreys, of course, and then you've got Jamie Gertz, who was really kind of a hot girl of the 80s, did a lot of great 80s movies, and she plays star in this movie. So yeah, it was, it's got a very MTV feel about it all around, and so maybe that kind of overshadowed the horror elements a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. At least that's how I felt, and I think that's what kept me away from the movie so much. Is I thought, this isn't going to be such a hardcore horror film, and so I'm not going to spend the time watching it. Now, having said that and put it in and watched it, my gosh, this is the lost 80s movie that I've always wanted to see.
Yeah.
I mean, from the moment the music kicks in, the soundtrack is just total 80s. It's so my style, actually.
Right. Yeah, the soundtrack. Yeah, it's got these great 80s rock music. The main song, "Cry Little Sister," is kind of an iconic song in its own right, and it comes from here, and they've used it in every sequel to this movie, and I don't know. I mean, you're right. It's solidly planted in the 80s.
Oh man, is it ever? And it's really has some really unique camera work. I was really surprised, actually, at the style. It was clear that these guys were going for something very different. You get that immediate swooping, while the music is playing, you get that immediate swooping view into the fiction, the Santa Clara, which is clearly Santa Monica, California,
right.
Down onto the beach. And then, of course, these point-of-view shots from the vampires where you don't see the vampires flying. In fact, I'm not sure you ever see the vampires flying in this movie. But
there's just one little part where it's kind of suggested towards the end, yeah.
Yeah, but you get that point of view where they're swooping down on the couple in the car and the security guard who tells the guys off and tells them to get off the carousel and get out. And then they come down and they have their revenge and yank him away from the car as he's going home for the night, pulling off that car door with it. It starts out being really cool, but then I feel like it happens over and over again, and it gets a little cheesy, I think, as the movie goes on.
Yeah, and I don't know what that, I don't know if that was a stylistic choice or if it was budget constraints or what. And I think that had they tried to do a lot with showing the vampires flying around, that could have very easily gotten cheesy really fast. I'm almost happy that they instead went the other route and kind of let us get these point of view shots where we hear the wind kind of racing by as though we were flying through the air, and you just have the perspective of the vampires attacking. You don't really see the attack. You just kind of see it from their point of view. And yeah, I think it works, but I can see where you're coming from in saying that maybe they could have changed it up every once in a while. Because they do utilize the effect a lot.
Yeah, you're right. With that 80s special effects that were available at the time, it would have started to look kind of silly if they had done that. But I guess it's nice to leave a little bit of that to the imagination as well.
Sure.
And the movie starts out with this family that's basically moved in. Father's out of the picture for some reason. Were they recently divorced?
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of think that that's going to be an element throughout the movie. Is this family of three, the mother and the two sons, really struggling to piece their lives together after a divorce? It really doesn't go into those themes much at all, does it?
Not very much, and it's a little sad because the mom is played by Diane Wiest, who is a great actress. She's been working forever. She's still working. You still see her all over. I think she's got a show on network television right now, and she's really good in this movie. She's young and pretty and soft-spoken, and she's a great 80s mom. It's the kind of mom. I have a great mom, but it's the kind of mom you want. She seems like a cool, hip mom, and she's got these two boys. Sam is Corey Haim, and Michael, Jason Patrick. Somebody else who was doing quite a lot in the 80s and early 90s. And yeah, it sets it up as this dynamic. This small family of three who's been dislocated. They're now moving to this new city, Santa Carla, and after that whole intro thing with the vampires on the boardwalk, that's where we pick up. It's just them coming into town. They pass the Santa Carla billboard, and after they drive past it, Michael, Jason Patrick, looks back and he sees on the back that it's graffitied and it says the murder capital of the world. And so we know that there's going to be danger involved, and that's kind of where it goes. You're right. We don't get a whole lot of the family dynamic. There are a couple of scenes after Michael kind of gets involved with the vampires and he's starting to act strange. There's one nice scene between him and the mom, Lucy, where she's expressing her concern. And
Michael, look at me. If there's a girl...
I'm tired, Mom.
We could talk...
I'm tired.
We could talk about anything you wanted to talk about.
I have more serious things in my mind than girls in school. There's things I'm dealing with that you can...
Things I wouldn't understand.
She's worried about him. And again, like I said, she's just so sweet and soft-spoken, and she seems like the kind of mom that somebody could really open up to, but it doesn't explore that too much, which is maybe a little bit of a weakness.
Yeah, it seems like it could have gone there, and it would have been a really interesting movie, but they instead tried to go this other direction and focus a little bit more on comedy in what I felt like were some almost... To me, the movie just felt like it didn't know what it wanted to be. It didn't know if it wanted to be this hip, scary vampire movie, or if it wanted to be a horror comedy almost on par with Fright Night or something like that. And it was jarring to me that you have these elements that were, and admittedly, pretty hip. And I think those parts, if you take out the cheesy 80s music, would really still hold up today.
Right.
Where... it's Michael as the older brother, and being the fresh guy in town, he sees this girl from across the way in the crowd while they're watching this oiled up saxophone player.
Oh God, I love that scene so much. It's iconic. The whole scene. A lot of the action takes place on this boardwalk where it seems like it's the nightlife or whatever. And yeah, I mean, as soon as Michael and Sam get there, there's a little bit of introduction where they're going to live with their mom's dad, Grandpa. I don't even think he's ever given a name. They just call him Grandpa, and he's kind of quirky and funny. And they kind of establish here's where we are. But then the boys immediately kind of go out into the world and they're exploring their new world. And they go out at night on this boardwalk, and it's just this. It's so 80s. I'll probably say that a million times, but it feels like one of those 80s concert videos where you've got all the cool hip kids in the audience dancing around and sweating, and then you've got this guy in these purple hot pants on stage just doing this epic saxophone rock solo, and oh God, it's funny. Yeah, and right away, we get thrown into the plot where Michael sees this girl, Star, played by Jamie Gertz, and they kind of share some furtive glances, and then we get kind of thrown into the world.
Yeah, he's interested in Star, so he starts chasing him. And, of course, his little brother Sam is tailing along, like, you really want to follow that girl? And, of course, when he gets to her, she's hopped on the back of a motorbike with this gang that we had seen earlier,
right?
And led by Kiefer Sutherland's character. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting here where you expect Kiefer Sutherland's character, whose name is...
David.
You expect David to be mad. Again, this would be one of those scenes in the 80s movies where it's like, what, you want some of my girlfriend? Well, new boy in town, Karate Kid style, kicking up his tires at him and blasting away or beating him up or something. But he doesn't do that. He kind of looks at him and it's almost a come on, and then it's almost a challenge, like, come get us.
Right.
Kind of deal.
Yeah. You're right. It would be that classic Karate Kid thing, let's duke it out, kind of see who the bigger man is or whatever. But instead, David, it seems at first like he's challenging to a motorcycle race, but Michael says, I can't beat your bike. And he says, well, you don't have to beat me, you just have to keep up. And so they go, biking around, and eventually they end up at this, I guess it's like a rundown hotel. Like they explained that there had been some big earthquake in the 70s, and this hotel had been sitting right on the fault line, and the fault opened up and swallowed this hotel, and this is their lair now.
And it's really cool.
It is really cool.
It's a neat update of sort of the iconic Dracula in his massive castle that's sort of run down over the ages with cobwebs everywhere and broken furniture because it's unkept. This is the same way, except it's because the hotel's been abandoned. And it creates that layer that's not only castle-like, but it's also cave-like because it is underground.
Right. And it's dilapidated, but at the same time it's kind of got this hip 80s feel. It's got the this huge poster of Jim Morrison on the wall. And that's where they hang out. And we already assume that going into it, we know this is a vampire movie. We know these guys are vampires, but of course Michael doesn't know. And it's almost kind of like he's being initiated into their gang. And what surprised me watching this scene again was how manipulative David is in getting Michael dragged into their vampire group. It's kind of sexy and kind of seductive, but at the same time, there's a lot of trickery going on. What they do is they get him down there, and then David, well, first, I think he passes him a joint. That happens really quick. I didn't even notice. I didn't know what was going on there when I was a kid. But then he says, we've got some food. Let's eat. And it's Chinese food. And he passes Michael a takeout container, and Michael starts to eat the rice, and David says, how you like those maggots? And Michael kind of laughs and thinks he's joking, but then he looks down, and the box is crawling with maggots, and so he spits the rice out and throws it down on the ground.
Sorry about that. No hard feelings, huh? Why don't you try some noodles? They're worms. I mean, they're worms. Tony. They're only noodles, Michael.
So there's this kind of trickery going on, which leads up to them saying, or David saying, okay, here now, drink this. And he's got this bottle of wine, presumably, but it's like this fancy gilded bottle. And he hands it to Michael, and Star comes around and says, you don't have to do it. It's blood. And Michael says, oh, yeah, right, it's blood. And he drinks it. And that presumably then is what turns him into a vampire, or as we find out later, half vampire.
As it plays around with the lore just a little bit.
Right. But I had never noticed, I don't know. I guess I wasn't really thinking about nuance when I was 12 or whatever, but, it was really kind of a seductive, manipulative thing, and then from that point on, he's sucked in, and there's really no getting out of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because I guess instead of being that sexual vampire thing that you get an awful lot, which is almost part and parcel of vampire, this is more macho. In a way, he doesn't want to look bad in front of this girl, even though this girl obviously has a boyfriend. He clearly still wants to impress her somehow, but he also, maybe because he's the new kid in town, is a little bit interested in joining up with the bad boys. He's maybe at that right age, that rebellious age, and so there's a little bit of that too about the going through the adolescence or going through this particular phase of manhood, and this is the challenge part of the manhood.
Right.
And he even says at one point, David says, how far will you go? Right. And that's almost the key message in this movie. It's all a big challenge to him. So it does play with that a little bit. There's less of the sexiness and more of this masculine adolescent challenge going back and forth, and which works with the title of the movie, The Lost Boys.
Right.
It's taken from Peter Pan and the Lost Boys who never grow up. In a way, David's sort of the leader of these lost boys who aren't going to grow up because they're immortal. It's really an interesting idea, and there's a bit of background behind how this movie came about too, right?
Yeah, and that's something that of course, I didn't know at the time, and I think I only read about fairly recently, is that the original script was inspired by Peter Pan. I don't know, I don't have the scriptwriter's name written down, but the original concept was, he thought, with the story of Peter Pan, if you strip it down to what, its bare essentials, you've got these boys who never age, who never grow up, and who, come and kind of seduce other children to come into their fray. And that was, this movie was initially kind of supposed to be a dark Peter Pan story. In fact, I believe David's name was eventually, the leader of the vampires, his name was originally going to be Peter. The two brothers were going to be Michael and John. Michael and John, because those were the young boys in Peter Pan. Lots of connections. I think the mom's name was going to be Wendy, and one of the only things that ended up surviving was the dog's name. Corey Haim has a dog in the movie. It's named Nanook, and I had never put together the dog in Peter Pan is named Nanny. And so there's all these connections. When throughout the process of getting the movie made, the filmmakers decided that, and originally the vampires were supposed to be like 5th or 6th grade kind of age.
It was almost going to be like a Goonies vampire movie in a way.
Right, yeah, and Richard Donner produced this, the director of the Goonies, and that was their original go, but somebody, some executive or somebody thought that wasn't cool enough, it wasn't sexy enough.
I think it was Joel Schumacher, the actual director, who came on and said, look, I'm not interested in this unless we change it and make it more, make the boys older.
Right. And so they did. And in doing that, it lost a lot of those connections. And that's fine. The movie stands alone without those elements perfectly fine, I think. But, that would have been an interesting movie. That kind
it
of
would have
dark
been.
Twist on Peter Pan.
Well, it feels like the movie still left a little bit of an imprint of those earlier versions because you have Michael's younger brother, Sam, who's almost bears witness to this over the course of Michael's transformation. And he has palled up a little bit, again, in another, I guess, a younger sort of asserting yourself way with the two comic book store owners played by Corey Feldman and Jameson Newlander, Edgar Frog and Alan Frog, and I guess they're brothers. And it's a little silly, I think, and I think it's really kind of a knock against the movie, the comedy that they really play. Corey Feldman, to be honest, his acting's not that great in this movie, and really neither is Corey Haim's.
Yeah, it comes across as a little juvenile, and I see what you're saying with, it kind of not knowing what it wants to be, because all of the stuff with Michael and David and the other vampires, that's pretty straightforward horror stuff. But then you've got this other plot line with, Corey Haim meeting the Frog brothers, Edgar and Alan, wink, wink, Edgar Allan. And that's all played for the comedy, and really most of Corey Haim's stuff is played for the comedy. And when those two worlds collide, I don't know. It's like it kind of just doesn't. Yeah, and it doesn't. It's like two puzzle pieces that just don't quite fit. Like you're trying to force them to fit together, and they just don't quite fit.
And we've seen, really good horror and comedy, even in this era, work really well. I keep going back to Fright Night. I think Fright Night strikes this great balance between humor, but also is utterly terrifying at moments. And I think it bounces between the two really well. This movie just doesn't seem to do that. Michael goes out with the guys, and of course he starts feeling ill. There's the big scene where they go out onto a bridge, and they're laughing, and the gang, led by David, one by one start to drop below the bridge and challenge Michael to fall down with him. And so he jumps down because he still hears their voices coming up through the fog, and they're just hanging, from this bridge. And then the train goes across the bridge, and the train's rattling the bridge, and it seems like it's very difficult for them to hold on. In the meantime, Michael's terrified. These guys are laughing, and one by one they let go and tell him to let go. And the only reason he lets go is because after they let go, he can still hear their voices through the fog. And I don't know, maybe it's a little unclear. Maybe it was just getting too hard for him to hold on. But he finally does let go. He falls through the fog in what you thought was a really super silly scene.
Yeah, I don't remember thinking it silly at the time. This movie came out in 1987. I'm sure I probably didn't see it until a couple years after that, but even then I would have only been like 10, 11, 12, probably when I first saw it. And I don't remember thinking it cheesy at the time, so maybe we've just kind of gotten spoiled with the kinds of effects they can use now. But, really, this fall through the fog, it almost looks like, they just put him in a room, filled it up with fog, and then just kind of told him to thrash his upper body around,
That's right.
It looks kind of goofy. And, going back to the whole comedy thing, again, I think it may just be our modern sensibility, because at the time it worked for me. I liked it at the time. In fact, I think maybe at the time I almost related more to the younger characters, probably because I was more their age. The older characters were, the big kids, that I didn't really fit in with. So, we can sit here and both of us, be a little bit critical of the movie, but I loved it. I loved it as a kid. And it almost pains me a little bit now to kind of go back and look at it with a more critical eye. So, as much as I criticize it, folks out there, be aware that it's coming from a place of love. Because as 80s and cheesy as it may come across sometimes, I still like it, and I would still and will, I'm sure, keep watching it.
Well, you kind of bring up an interesting point there. I mean, I guess having those elements where they're back in the house and the younger brother is quizzing the older brother and thinks he's a vampire and is trying all this silly stuff on him and is going back to the comic book guys who are like, you just need to stake him, you just need to stake him. That part, being able to relate better to maybe that aspect when you're younger, helps the movie to bridge a bit of a gap in generations so that it can appeal both to the older of the teenagers, it can appeal to the pre-adolescents maybe in the audience, or the adolescents in the audience whose parents might have taken them to see it.
I think so, and I think that the movie, I think that the audience that they were going for was, a young audience, teenagers, adolescents. I'm sure adults enjoyed it as well, but it really seems targeted towards a younger audience. And that scene that you're talking about, Michael comes home and he is, starting to experience these symptoms, I guess, of being a vampire, and he's really sensitive to light, and he's really tired during the day or whatnot, and that worries his mom, and she tries to talk to him, but that doesn't really go very far. And it's then. We've kind of left out and there's lots of these little side stories going on too. We just it kind of jumps from scene to scene, keeping us up with people. The mom has gotten a job at a video store. She's working for this guy named Max, who's the owner of the video store, and they're kind of starting this romantic relationship. And he's invited her out to dinner, and she wants to go. She asks Michael to stay home with Sam. And he doesn't want to, but he reluctantly agrees. And then there's this goofy scene with Corey Haim taking a bubble bath, and he's like singing this goofy song. And meanwhile, Michael is downstairs, and it's like his vampire impulses are overcoming him. Like he can't control it, and he kind of vamps out. His face changes, and he starts to head up, and it looks like he's going to attack his brother. But the dog, Nanook, senses something is off, and as Michael bursts into the room, at the same time, Sam goes down underneath the water, and so he doesn't see Michael in his vampire state. But Nanook, the dog, jumps up and attacks Michael, which, Sam hears that and comes up out of the water, and they start talking, and Michael says,
He was protecting you.
Look at your reflection in the mirror. You're creature of the night, Michael. Just like out of a comic book. You're a vampire, Michael. My own brother, a goddamn sucking vampire. Oh, you wait till Mom finds out, buddy.
The suggestion here, and the Frog brothers, who've already warned Sam about vampires in Santa Carla, they explain later that you don't become a full vampire until you make your first kill. So Michael is not yet a full vampire. He's only a half vampire, which is why he can be out in the day, why his reflection is still partly there. And then, as soon as that happens, Sam calls the Frog Brothers, and it's just, there are places where the comedy is goofy, but still, even today, there are some of the things that just cracked me up. Like he's on the phone with the Frog Brothers, and they're asking him all these questions.
You did the right thing by calling us. Does your brother sleep a lot?
Yeah, all day.
Does the sunlight freak him out?
He wears sunglasses in the house.
Bad breath, long fingernails.
Yeah, his fingernails are all a bit longer. He always had bad breath, though.
Just stupid jokes, but I found myself laughing regardless of how immature some of the humor may have been.
Yeah, and then there's a later scene too, where is it later that night, or when is it when he gets swept out the window?
I think it's that same night. All of this only takes place over a few days.
That's true.
Yeah. I think it's later that night because the mom is still on her date, after this whole thing where, he almost attacked his brother, I guess. Michael goes to sleep, and when he wakes up, he's floating on the ceiling. And it's like he can't control it or doesn't yet know how to control it, and so he kind of floats out the window. And Sam is on the phone with his mom. The mom has called from her date to check in, and Sam sees Michael floating outside the window, and he starts freaking out on the phone, screaming, help, he's a vampire, he's gonna get me. And of course the mom's freaking out, and she has to run out on her date. But, eventually Michael says, Sammy, help me, I'm your brother. And he does. He helps him in, and that's kind of where their whole quest to figure this out begins. How are we going to get out of this bad situation?
Yeah, and they get their information all from comic books, and so this is their manual.
The comic books are all strikingly accurate. Everything can be explained by the comic books. At one point, Sam is reading one of those horror comics, and it's talking about the hounds of hell. And right after and it shows this ferocious dog. Right after that, Sam and his mom Lucy go to Max, the video store owner. They go to his house during the day. The mom says that she wants to drop off a bottle of wine to apologize because she had just run out on the date. She hadn't even explained to him what was going on. She had just run out, and as she goes to try to deliver the wine up to the house, Max's dog Thorn growls at and starts to chase her really viciously and almost attacks her. And of course, that gets Sam thinking, that must be one of the hounds of hell. He must be guarding Max. So maybe Max is a vampire. And
because Edgar and Alan are saying that there's always a leader. There's a master vampire,
a head vampire, right?
And if you kill that guy, then all the rest of them, turn back to normal or die or something. And so they're piecing two and two together and thinking, oh well, it must be Max because he's the video store owner. The video store doesn't open until late,
right?
And goes through the nights, and he wasn't there, and he has the dog and all this stuff. And so they decide they're going to set up like a test for him while their mom Lucy has him over to her house.
Right.
She decides she's going to make something in order to make up for running out on the date, and the boys are going to be there too. And so then you get another one of these super comical scenes where the boys have prepared. They've splashed water on him during the meal.
Right.
They've prepared Parmesan cheese, but they've mixed a whole bunch of minced garlic in with it.
Right.
Ask him if he wants to put it on his spaghetti, and they show a mirror at him, and it's just this little comedy of errors where they're slowly sabotaging the dinner, and everybody's like, "What's going on? What's going on?" In the meantime, none of this stuff is working.
Right.
He can eat the garlic. They see his reflection in the mirror. He's not fazed by the water.
Right.
Nothing bothers him, and it's one of those tonally really silly moments in a movie that then follows up, I believe, with Michael searching out Star again, finding her in the lair, and them having a this long 80s like sex scene.
Right. And I don't even remember. The movie's probably, what is it rated? Do you know? Is it PG-13?
It's R.
Is it R? Okay.
Yeah, it is.
It's a very soft R. I mean, there are a couple of fairly gory scenes. At some point, the vampire gang takes Michael out. I think that's maybe a little bit later, but yeah, this sex scene. It's so. I mean, it looks like a music video. I mean, there's very little skin. They're not really doing anything more than making out kind of under like this gossamer, bed thing.
As the camera swoops around slowly.
Right. It's very foggy, and the music is playing, and it's funny to me. I didn't realize that it was R. I guess we find out soon after that, Star comes and finds Michael at his house, and Sam's there too, and she says, that was that meeting, our meeting last night, or earlier that night, or whatever. You were supposed to be my first. You were supposed to be my first kill, and that's kind of where we get the whole concept of Star and Michael, and there's a little boy in the group too, Laddie,
who just kind of shows up.
Yeah, I mean, he's there the whole time. I never knew as a kid who this little boy was. At one point in the movie, Diane Wiest puts a carton of milk in the refrigerator, and just for a split second, you see that Laddie's face is on the carton of milk. So he's a missing child. I read online that Star is very protective of Laddie throughout, and so I always kind of thought maybe that he was like her little brother or something. But what I read online was that no, he's no relation. It's just they almost got him for Star almost as like a pet, like a companion. But they, Star, Michael, and Laddie are just half vampires until they kill somebody, and if they can control themselves and keep themselves from killing someone, and if they can kill the head vampire, then they can go back to normal. The only gory scene that I can really think of off the top of my head is at one point, I think it's right around this point in the movie, Michael and the other vampires take... David and the other vampires take Michael out, I guess kind of for his true initiation. They crash this beach party. It's like skinheads partying on the beach or something. And this is the first time that Michael sees all of the vampires turn fully, and they attack these skinheads on the beach. And that gets pretty graphic. There's one image that always, when I was a kid, always freaked me out. One of the vampires, I don't remember if it's David or one of the others, grabs one of the skinheads and takes a bite out of his skull like he's taking a bite out of an apple, and the blood just sprays everywhere. And even as a lover of horror as a kid, that part always kind of had me hiding behind my fingers a little bit.
Well, it's brutal, but it's really stylishly shot, where you really just see snippets and quick flashes of what's going on, sometimes even in shadow. And the blood all has, the blood kind of sprays, but it's a little thin and it's a little fast. I thought that was a truly terrifying moment in the movie. I honestly didn't even imagine we were going to get, that happens at least halfway through.
Yes, yeah.
And up to a point, I was wondering, are these vampires even going to have fangs?
Right.
Are we going to even see them? Is it going to be that hip that this is the fangless vampire movie?
Right.
But no, they go full on right there. And it's interesting to see Michael struggle with that. He doesn't want to kill, but at the same time, he's feeling the urges, and you wonder if he's going to succumb, and he doesn't. It's really a powerful moment, in the movie. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it is a good moment, and still there's more of that seduction. Michael, he vamps out too. Yeah, I keep saying vamp out. Like that's something that people say. This movie was the first use of that phrase, and it kind of has gotten picked up in pop culture. They used it in Buffy the Vampire Slayer all the time. And I think it's worth noting that when they do vamp out, the makeup is really good. They're scary vampires, and the design of the vampires in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is one of my favorite shows ever, it was, I think they clearly took some inspiration from these vampires, but that scene is good because it's more of the seduction. Michael doesn't give in. He kind of falls, they're like in a tree or something, and he kind of falls out of the tree off down this sand dune, and the other vampires in this great image come walking up over the sand dune, lit from behind, and come walking down to him, and David says,
"So, now you know what we are, now you know what you are. You'll never grow old, Michael. And you'll never die. But you must feed."
It's a seductive thing, that's saying a lot. You'll never grow old and you'll never die. There's just this one little glitch. you gotta eat people.
Well, and you got to hand it to Kiefer Sutherland. He, in one of his first big screen roles, he is fantastic.
He is.
When he's not vamping out, he's freaky. He just seems like a character with so many different layers to him.
And he's a great actor. Again, this cast is really pretty impressive. Again, the young people, a lot of them at the beginning of their careers, but many of them went on to do great stuff. Kiefer Sutherland's gone on to do great stuff. He's really baby-faced in this movie. I mean, he looks really young, but at the same time, he's really got that bad boy, dangerous thing going down. He's a sexy guy in this movie.
Yes.
Even as a bad guy, he's a cool guy, even though he's the villain. He's badass.
Yeah, and that really adds a lot to it. I think the casting really saved this movie from being really made this more of an iconic movie than it might have been otherwise.
Right.
Was it really successful when it came out? It was a pretty big deal, wasn't it?
I think so. I mean, I don't remember. Again, I was just a kid, so I don't really remember. But I think it was pretty successful. And, clearly there's been a cult following. I mean, this is a movie that came out in 1987, and you still see references to it all over the place, or at least I do. If you frequent any horror forums or websites or whatever, I see reference to this all the time. So it's left its mark.
And so basically we come to a big showdown toward the end, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, this is what it comes down to is, okay, so they realize we got if we're going to get out of this, we got to find the head vampire. Michael knows where their lair is. So he and Sam and the Frog Brothers steal the grandpa's car and go there during the day, where presumably all the vampires are asleep. And they go in, and, I always, even as a kid, thought this was funny. They go into the lair, and they're, like, shouting back and forth to one another. Like, there's nothing covert or sly about this at all.
That's right. And before that, of course, there's that, again, one of those silly scenes where they're running around gathering all the materials.
Yes.
And they're going and filling their squirt gun. They barge into a church when a couple's having a wedding.
Yeah.
And everybody in the church just goes silent and turns around and stares at them while they fill their squirt guns with holy water from the receptacles at the front. And then they run out, and everyone just looks like,
Right. It's silly. It's a classic 80s montage with the 80s music in the background. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But so they get there, and the Frog Brothers are all gung-ho, and they go into, they figure that the vampires must be somewhere deep in the caves or whatever, and they go looking for them, and they're looking for them in coffins, and they don't find them in coffins. Instead, they find them hanging from the ceiling like bats, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
And David wears this big black, I don't know if it's leather or what, but like this big black trench coat throughout. And so when he's hanging upside down, the trench coat is kind of draped down around him, almost like bat wings. Cool image. They don't know, they've just got to start somewhere. So they say, okay, we'll start with this one. And they go to stake one of the smaller vampires. I don't know his name. It's the one from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, not Keanu Reeves, the other one.
Oh, yeah.
And they stake him, and blood just shoots out, like it's spraying all over. But it's not like normal blood, like it's sparkly, like glitter blood.
It's glam rock blood.
Totally, right. And they're all the boys, the Frog Brothers and Sam, are just drenched in blood. But the vampire screams as he's dying, and that wakes the other vampires up. And so the boys start running, and it's almost like they kind of have to crawl up a shaft. And this was the part where you kind of get the suggestion of them flying. David takes off after them, and as the boys are kind of laboriously making their way up the shaft, David just kind of glides up it and grabs Corey Haim's ankle and starts pulling him down. The Frog Brothers are pulling him up, and they're able to pull him up far enough so that David's hand pulls into the sunlight, where it erupts in flames. So he lets go and pulls it back, and then it's this great shot where it's just a close-up of his vampire face, and he's kind of screaming in pain at first, and then he stops, and his face kind of calms a little bit into just this, rage. One tear streams down his face, and he just says, "Tonight." And I read that that tear was not scripted. It was a total accident. He's got these crazy contacts in for his vampire makeup, and they were irritating his eyes so much that it just made him cry. And it was just a lucky coincidence, and they kept it, and it really worked well for the scene. And that's one of the scenes. It's really scary. It's very ominous, and I remember that being one of the ones that I remember a lot from when I was a kid.
Oh my gosh, that shot's incredibly cool. At that moment, my heart just kind of leapt for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good. I mean, what a happy accident.
Right. And
it's
then
a very subtle thing.
Yeah, and that leads up to the final showdown. I mean, we get to the climax where the guys. Well, and meanwhile, Michael has gotten Laddie and Star out of the lair. They all pile in the grandpa's car and head back to the house. The mom has another date with Max, so she's going to be gone. They somehow trick the grandpa into being gone, and they kind of prepare themselves for what they know is going to happen. These vampires are going to come after them that night, and that's exactly what happens. So they kind of set up some traps, like they put holy water. They fill the bathtub with water and put holy water in it, and they put a bunch of garlic in that. They've got all kinds of weapons set up, and they just basically wait for this siege, which then happens. Night falls, and here come the vampires, and it's the final showdown.
Yeah, it's like the end of A Nightmare on Elm Street, where they have all these traps set. Again, montage, setting all that up. And sure enough, the vampires come, and they dispatch them one by one. One comes in to the bathroom.
You're mine! You killed Marco!
Yeah, you're next!
No, you're next! Garlic don't work, boys!
Try holy water, death breath!
They splash some holy water up on his face, and it burns, and it's a cool effect, and he's all scarred from that. But then the vampire's still coming after them. But Nanook, the dog, heroically comes in and jumps up on the vampire and knocks him into the tub, where he kind of explodes. And as they were preparing for all of this, Corey Feldman's character had said no two vampires go the same way. Some explode, some implode, some go out screaming, some go quietly, and that really foreshadows the deaths of all the vampires to come. This first one, who
goes
dies
out like
in the
an
bathtub.
atom bomb.
What was that?
He goes out like an atom bomb.
Right. Not only does he kind of explode in the bathtub, but like it explodes all of the plumbing in the whole house. And it's, water spraying everywhere. And then the next one attacks. They all split up. They somehow, not intentionally, but they all get split up in the house. So Corey Haim is left to battle the next one kind of by himself. And he's got these arrows, and he shoots the vampire with an arrow, but he misses the heart on the first shot. But then he shoots again, and he gets it, and it launches the vampire back into the stereo, which then comes on, and it's almost like the vampire's being electrocuted while he's being staked, and the loud rock music is playing, and once he's dead, Corey Haim. It's so cornball, but I just thought it was so funny when I was a kid. He's like,
Death by stereo.
Just the goofiest, silliest 80s jokes, but my 12-year-old self got a kick out of it.
Yeah, my 38-year-old self thought it was pretty silly. That's one part that doesn't hold up very well.
Oh no, it's totally cheesy. I don't care. I still love it.
Yeah, it's okay.
Then the Laddie, the little boy, kind of vamps out for a second, and the Frog Brothers kind of start to go after him, but Star protects him. And then we're down to the final battle, which is the battle between Michael and David. And this is the only place where the flying really comes. They have their whole battle in the air, like in this big open living area in the house, and I thought it was pretty cool, pretty effective, especially for what they had available as far as effects go at the time.
Yeah, it's really neat, and it's a great climactic moment where Michael now suddenly has to give into his rage. Only this time, instead of giving into his rage towards feeding on an innocent victim, he's turning that towards David. And I thought thematically that was really, really good.
Yeah.
It's fighting fire with fire. It really puts them on an even playing field right here, and you're really wondering who's gonna survive at the end.
Right. And it all happens very quickly. Michael gets a hold of David in the air and pushes him back towards the wall where there are like some antlers. The grandpa that they live with does taxidermy, so there's all this taxidermy all around. But it misses. David just hits the wall, and he says, "You missed," or something like that. And David then starts pushing Michael back towards the taxidermy room, which is just full of antlers and stuff. And it almost looks like David is going to win, but at the last second, Michael grabs hold of the door frame and is able to turn David around, and he impales David on the antlers. Now, when I was a kid, I always had a big problem with this because typical lore says that you have to kill a vampire with a stake through the heart. Now, usually it's a wooden stake. Sometimes if you go back, even further, silver stakes worked in some stories, but antlers are neither wood nor silver. And so I never really understood why David died from this injury. And he dies really quietly. His face goes back to kind of his human look, and it's almost sad. Like you almost kind of see the little bit of humanity in David as he's dying. Go ahead.
And with Kiefer Sutherland having that kind of boyish look again,
right?
It's almost like he's going back to a boy. He does have it's touching,
right,
in a way that you wouldn't expect,
right.
He's a victim that, you realize he's a victim just as much as anybody else at that point. Right,
exactly. What I read online was that initially in the script and when they filmed it, it was meant to be kind of left open because they had already planned a sequel, and they had planned on bringing David back for the sequel. So he wasn't supposed to be really dead, but of course the sequel was supposed to be The Lost Girls, and it was supposed to, obviously just be kind of a spin-off. But David was going to appear. Of course, it never materialized. But so anyway, within the context of the movie as a standalone film, he's dead. But Star and Michael and Laddie are unchanged. They now have killed all the vampires that they know of, but apparently they have not yet gotten the head vampire because nothing has changed.
Mm-hmm. And of course, who's the only one who that could possibly be is Max. And sure enough, Max appears. Did Max just come in?
Max and the mom were on a date.
That's right. Max and the mom were on a date.
I don't remember. I think that we got a little bit of a scene where Lucy was telling Max, I'm worried about my boys. And it almost seems like they had come home to check on the boys. And, of course, they get there, right as everything has ended. And the house is a wreck. Everything's destroyed. Lucy comes in. She's freaking out. Sam's trying to calm her down. Meanwhile, Max walks into the room and sees David's dead body. And doesn't immediately freak out, as you would expect one might upon encountering a dead body. Instead, he turns around and walks back in and says, "I'm sorry, Lucy. This is all my fault." And then he explains, he says, "My boys misbehaved." And that's where they figure out that he's the head vampire. And he explains, and we talked about this, that, I don't know, it's kind of loose storytelling, but he explains that all along his goal was to get Lucy. He wanted Lucy. And so to do that, he thought that if he were able to draw her boys into the fray, that then she would have no choice but to join them and join him.
It's so convoluted. I mean, it's so convoluted. It requires so much chance, but also I just don't get it. I mean, she was falling for him anyway,
right?
You know, and so I don't see how he couldn't have just gone directly for her.
Right.
It was working just fine.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess, you know, when it comes down to it, he could have just taken her by force, and then she would have been a vampire and wouldn't have had any choice in the matter, and that may have been the end of it. I guess what we're supposed to think is that his reasoning was that she wouldn't want to leave her boys behind in order to be with him. But like you said, I mean, it's pretty convoluted. I mean, he could have just taken her if that's what he really wanted.
Well, and then we get the even more silly way that Max is dispatched, which is suddenly out of nowhere, Deus Ex Machina.
Oh
Grandpa
God, yeah, definition, yeah.
crashes through the house at just the right moment with a truck loaded with giant stakes, which he had been sharpening up his fence posts earlier.
Right,
right through the heart of Max, the body of Max.
Right,
it is so goofball.
Oh, it's totally corny, yeah.
and then he gets out and he surveys the damage, walks to the fridge, grabs one of his root beers out of there, and says the goofy ending line.
One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach. All the damn vampires.
While Lucy and Sam and Michael and Star just kind of look on. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, it ends really quickly, like you said, Deus Ex Machina. It's exactly that. I don't know. It never bothered me, and that final joke, you know, I always it's very wink at the audience, but it always made me smile and still kind of does. I don't know the name of the guy. Oh no, I do. The grandpa was played by Bernard Hughes, and I don't know what else he's been in, but he's a totally recognizable guy. You know, always plays this kind of crotchety grandfather type, and he doesn't have much to do in the movie, but he zings these little one-liners every once in a while, and he's funny. But yeah, I mean that's it in a nutshell. You know, the way we've talked about it I don't know. I feel like we're not giving it credit where credit is due. You know, there's a lot of good stuff about the movie. You know, the vampire effects, the makeup is excellent, I think. There's some... Go ahead.
And I feel like in the vampire parts of the movie, it's really stylish and it's really well done. I feel like if you had taken out some of the silliness, the attempts to be goofy, which I think are really just the vestiges of that earlier draft of the script when it was going to be a little more Goonies-esque, if you stripped that out of it or toned it way the heck down, the movie wouldn't be, I think, so jarring. It would still be dated, but it wouldn't. It would maintain a consistent sense of style throughout. It wouldn't be bouncing you back from one side to the other. And I think that works in some movies. Just for me, here and now, it didn't work. But I think you have a good point there. If I had seen this when I was a kid, when it came out, I probably would have the different perspective on it that you have. I think I absolutely would have.
I think so, and I really think that they had a specific target audience in mind, and I think that target audience was, you know, adolescent, teenage boys, and you know, at the time, I think it had to have, resonated with people our age. Otherwise, why would we still be talking about it? Why would we still be seeing imagery from it all over the place? It clearly had some impact, and you know, it launched careers for some of these young actors. So I still appreciate it for what it is. There were a couple of sequels that came out in the 2000s. The first sequel was intended to be kind of a vehicle for a comeback for Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. eventually, when they got around to making the film, Corey Haim was struggling so much with addiction and his health that he wasn't really able to participate, and so Corey Feldman was really, it was more for him. Corey Haim doesn't even really appear in the movie. There are some bonus scenes, or maybe there's a post-credit scene where Corey Haim is a vampire, and he and Corey Feldman kind of face off. You only see the beginning of it. You don't see what happens. And then, sadly, tragically, Corey Haim died. I believe he was, I don't even remember how old he was. He was young, far too young to pass away. But he passed away before the second sequel came out. And I saw both sequels. I don't remember really anything about them. They were very not memorable. I think Kiefer Sutherland's younger brother played the lead vampire in one of them. But definitely, nothing that you would need to run out and see right away. Which, it's too bad. They were trying to capitalize on the name or whatever, and it didn't work. But we still got this one to go back to, at least, if we need a little cheesy 80s fun.
We do, and you know what? I think I will go back to it for that reason alone. Sometimes you just want a little cheesy 80s fun.
Yeah.
You want to hear some In Excess playing in the background.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, we're still here. We're still together, even though we might be half a world apart. We're going to continue coming to you. So please continue to check us out on iTunes and on Stitcher. You can find our page on Facebook. Leave us a message. Let us know what you think of this episode. Check out our previous episodes and give us some ideas and thoughts for movies we should see coming up. Until that time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.